Slide shows from a bird's eye view the geographic location of the Salton Sea in relationship to the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. 100 miles with a 3,600-foot elevation gain to the Pacific Ocean, 160 miles and a 250-foot gain in elevation to the Gulf of Mexico. We have a short video produced by Alianza, a Coachella Valley leader in environmental justice and Sierra Club partner in our efforts to build community influence at the Salton Sea and in the greater eastern Coachella Valley. This video highlights some of the many community members engaged in shifting the decision-making from making power from distant decision makers to residents in the local communities. We will show just the first 5 minutes of this 14-minute video, and we'll put the link to the full video in the chat for those who are interested. In this video, you will see two Sierra Club youth activists, Cynthia Portilla and Ignacio Ocha. There are more than 10,000 people in the communities living directly around the Salton Sea, with more than 650,000 people in the greater air basin impacted by the Salton Sea. Many communities living in the rural areas around the sea experience higher levels of poverty and unemployment, substandard housing and public infrastructure, lack of access to healthcare, and exposure to environmental hazards. Public health impacts for communities living around the sea include increased risks for cardiac disease, diabetes, asthma, respiratory illness, nosebleeds, and mortality. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic is greatly exacerbated in this area. The Salton Sea's pollutants and the demographics in the eastern Coachella Valley make these communities particularly vulnerable to this pandemic. Many do not have the ability to shelter in place or physically distance at home due to overcrowded living situations. Many are part of the essential labor force and work in our agricultural businesses. Nearly 25% of the residents in the unincorporated areas of Mecca and Oasis live without health insurance. We believe that these communities living around the Salton Sea must be an integral part of shaping the vision for the sea's future. The state must provide meaningful opportunities to build community trust and long-term resident involvement to ensure all projects address public health and well-being and promote local benefits, like investments in infrastructure and greater access to nature in and around the Salton Sea. Now we'll watch our video.
Para mí vivir aquí es un lugar con paz, mucha calma, mucho amor. Entonces todo esto es mi vida.
I drive by the sea every day. The backdrop of the mountains, you know, the blue lake. It is so beautiful and people enjoy it. People are proud. There are vibrant communities that live right next to the sea.
Really what makes it home is the fact that there's so many people out here. I have a lot of my close friends here, like people who I consider family. I don't see myself leaving.
We produce 80% of the nation's dates here. It's a very unique place and special place. Even though it does get hot, harsh conditions create strong people.
There's this thing that happens when you come inside of the valley. There's an immediate spike in temperature. I've always associated that coming in, getting warm, like, now I'm home.
Home is realizing that you love a place, but that it's not necessarily great, but that you have the power to change it and make it better.
The Salton Sea, California's largest man-made lake, spans the Imperial and Coachella valleys and was formed in 1905 after a major engineering mistake. It's since become an ecological disaster, unfolding in slow motion because of its high toxicity levels and lack of natural outlets. This shrinking sea is exposing nearby communities to lung-damaging toxic dust and setting off an alarming health crisis here. But this story is not just about the sea. It's about all of the people who live here, who deserve clean air, water, and places to learn and play so that they can live long, healthy lives full of opportunity.
A lot of the issues that are around the Salton Sea especially are pretty much neglected and not really seen.
A lot of the communities that are around the Salton Sea are minorities. We do care, and we're tired of being pushed aside, especially the Salton Sea. We're being more vocal, we're learning, we're teaching ourselves and teaching our community.
For the first 4 to 6 years of my life, I lived in an apartment. At one point, my dad got hurt in his job, so he couldn't work anymore, and one thing led to the other. We lost pretty much everything that we had.
My family couldn't afford to live in a home. We lived in a mobile home park that was about 2 miles away from town. In order to get even the most basic necessities, food, catching a bus to come into Coachella for the doctor, we had to walk about 2 miles, and we did that even in the summer, even when it was 120 degrees.
My parents, they worked so hard for everything. I think they're the definition of resilience. You know, they were able to get back on their feet. Even now, you know, we don't have a lot, but what we do have, they make sure that we have enough.
I remember boarding the bus, and I asked the bus driver, why was it that we couldn't get a bus in the mobile home park where we lived? There were many of us who were walking to catch the bus. And he said that there was no ridership. I remember at that point just feeling how unfair that was, that there couldn't be transportation to people who didn't have other means.
I'd get in trouble at school because there'd be like just people who were picking on the little guy. I always tried to, you know, just stick out for whoever was not on an equal footing, I guess. And as I grew up as an adult, I learned to channel that into more productive ways.
I didn't even know that there was a world of people who could make a shift in the conditions that you lived in. I did not get exposed to that until I actually left the Coachella Valley. We should be exposing and talking about the importance of being civically involved at, you know, elementary all the way to high school. Not figuring it out once you go off to college, take a few courses, and then you figure out, oh, wait a minute, I could have done something this entire time.
There's something that my mother has always said, and she continues to say this to this day, is that, you know, their whole objective of coming to this country and then calling Coachella home was to give me and my brother the opportunities that they didn't receive. I was a junior in high school. We were running around downtown Coachella, across the street from City Hall. A woman who worked at City Hall, she offered us a summer job. The summer job was to videotape city council meetings. That summer and the following summer, we dedicated ourselves to making a little money. But at the same time, it was an opportunity, though, for us to actually learn about what local government functions were or weren't. We started paying attention. We started paying attention to the role of 5 individuals who were sitting up on this really fancy desk and the deliberations and debates that were happening about decisions that they were making that we understood impacted the lives of the people who lived in the city. And so that planted a seed. When we arrived to Sacramento, one of the top priorities for the people of our district, and I think we've been able to elevate that priority to become a priority for California, is the problem with the Salton Sea.
Yo soy mexicana de Michoacán, de un pueblo indígena.
Again, we'll put the link to that full video in the chat. At the time of the water transfer to San Diego in 2003, this was the largest U.S. rural to urban water transfer that ever happened. And virtually everybody realized that this would severely decrease the amount of agricultural runoff from the Imperial Valley farms needed to sustain the sea. At the time of the agreement in 2003, the state assumed responsibility to solve the forecasted ecological and health impacts of the transfer. Well, to allow time to remedy the forecasted disaster, there was a grace period for the water transfer ramping up over 15 years, from 2003 to 2018. We can see a big jump in the water transfer rate in 2018 on this schedule, topping out in 2021 at over 260,000 acre feet a year. Unfortunately, during most of that 15 years, the state did little but study the problem while not engaging the local communities most affected by these drastic changes at the sea. In the meantime, tens of thousands of acres of dust-laden playa became exposed, exacerbating health issues for those communities. Ongoing evaporation combined with diminished water inflows caused the concentration of salts in the Salton Sea to spike to 50% higher than that in the ocean, causing a collapse of the once abundant fishery, which supported tourism and many of the fish-eating migratory birds. Then in 2017, at the 11th hour, the state issued its 10-year management plan and promised to have a sustaining long-term plan ready by 2022. So now I'm going to hand the discussion over to John Pick, to bring us up to date with what's going on with the sea currently.
Kim, do we want to see if there's any questions in the short term here?
Let's leave them all to the end. John will collect the questions after William speaks.
Okay, perfect. And keep putting them in the chat, folks, if you have questions. Thank you.
Evening. Now going on 4 years later, the state's plan is still plagued by delays, and very little on the groundwork has been done, except a mere 112 acres that have been plowed to slow the dust from blowing. Millions of dollars have been allocated, but progress has been stalled by engineering, staffing, permitting, land ownership, and easement problems. Exactly the kind of problems that the 15-year grace period for the water transfer was intended to solve. The state is committed to completing 29,800 acres of projects to cover exposed playa by 2029. However, the state has failed to hit the project goals for every year since the SMP was adopted in 2017. Fortunately, the major land easement impasse between the state and Imperial Irrigation District that has stymied projects at the south end of the sea has been addressed and sorted out with the help of Governor Newsom. So now at least one large project is definitely funded and slated to start in 2021. The project, located at the south end of the sea and fed by the New River, is named the Species Conservation Habitat. The area will be a series of mostly shallow ponds to quell dust and to provide wading habitat for many thousands of shorebirds. At the north end of the Salton Sea, where underserved communities live closest to the shore and are more subject to health threats, another major project is proposed. This project is the North Lake, to be fed by runoff from the Whitewater River channel. This will be a multi-benefit project, not only quelling dust, but also sustaining a robust fishery for migrating birds and recreational and an economic driver for the surrounding communities. How will the various SS projects be funded? Over the years, legislators like Eduardo Garcia have worked successfully with the state to procure millions of dollars for remediation of the Salton Sea. The state estimates that it will take $400 million plus its 10-year plan, and most of that money has been found. The state has not yet found funding for ongoing operations, maintenance, scientific monitoring, and adaptive management, which will likely total several million dollars annually. So what can you do to help with this problem? You've just watched a presentation that shows the devastation that has occurred at the sea, as well as some possible solutions that would be a start in restoring the sea and the surrounding area to its previous health and natural beauty. We need to urge leaders to take immediate action. Your involvement could be as simple as making calls, sending emails to your representative and agencies, making public statements, or being more involved if you so choose. Join us by posting your name and email information in the chat section of the Zoom. We will contact you and discuss what level of involvement you would prefer. At this point in time, I'm going to pass it back to Kim.
Thanks, John. I'm going to introduce our second presenter. And again, put your questions in the chat. And at the end of this next presentation, we'll cover the questions both for our presentation and William's presentation. I'm introducing William Porter, who's a member of the Department of Environmental Sciences at UC Riverside. Will, as he likes to be called, has been an assistant professor of astronomic dynamics and modeling at UC Riverside since 2017. He earned his PhD in applied science from Portland State University. And his research areas of interest include statistical analysis of modeled and observed air quality events, atmospheric impacts of land use change and policy, human health and environmental justice implications of air pollution. Sounds like right on point for the Salton Sea. Some of us had a chance to see Will at the Salton Sea Summit in Palm Desert back in October of 2019, speaking on the subject of air quality at the sea. So welcome, Will, and take it away. I'm going to stop my share.
Sounds good.
Good.
And let's see if I can get this up here. How does that look?
Good.
All right. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And also thank you for the invitation. I know many of you have probably been interested in actively working on Salton Sea related issues for some time. And it's my pleasure to be here and share the piece of my contributions and also share that of my colleagues as well. And I'll say at the outset, there's many people whose work I'm going to be kind of putting up here. And I've done my best to name them, but there's definitely, it's not all of my work here for sure. So I just want to make that clear from the outset. As Kim mentioned, I'm an assistant professor over at UCR, and I did move down here to Southern California in 2017. And I was struck immediately by this issue of the Salton Sea. I think it's a really unique and important area. And I think that the kinds of problems that are coming up are problems that are going to be representative of issues that are going to happen in more and more places around the world. And I think that it stands as an opportunity for us and for communities in the region to demonstrate solutions. And I think that it really speaks to me as something that we have not just in terms of challenging us, but also allowing us the opportunity to work on some of these kinds of problems and try out and demonstrate, hopefully, workable solutions. So we saw a nice introduction of the Salton Sea, and I think everybody here has seen a really good kind of summary of its most recent formation events, some of the problems that are associated with its drying up that is, of course, undergoing right now. And of course, it's also, a really beautiful area under many circumstances. When you go down there, it's strikingly beautiful. And I think that it definitely kind of calls for solutions that can maintain its beauty and maintain its safety over time. I'm an atmospheric physicist. As Kim mentioned, I study air quality and dust. Of course, there's a lot of physics involved. The Salton Sea region and Riverside County in general is very dusty. This shouldn't come as news to anybody who lives around the area. This is a map here of counties that have been marked in the United States for designated non-attainment, which is basically a fancy way of saying they have really high levels of this particular pollutant. And this pollutant is PM10, which stands for particulate matter that's under 10 microns in size. And that includes things like wind-blown dust. And so you can see down here, Riverside County, much of this coming from the eastern part of the county is a very dusty place and stands out among all the counties in the United States for its issues related to dust. And we know that in the region, we can get really amazing dust storms that can blow through. We have different types of dynamics in that valley that cause those kinds of dust storms to emerge. And it's an area where we know this is likely to increase. We saw information before about the expected reduction in water levels around the Salton Sea. And we know that as we project these declining changes, especially after the changes in water allocation that most recently occurred, we expect that elevation, which is shown here in blue, to accelerate over the next 10 to 20 years until we reach some sort of equilibrium in the coming decades. Salinity is on the rise, of course, as water drops. The concentrations of salinity and other concentrations of particulates and compounds in the sea are going to increase in concentration, which is its own issue, of course. But this drop in water level, of course, is also going to be bring with it a reduction in the water level. And we saw this again in some of the earlier slides, that when you there's a lot of discussion and a lot of people spend a lot of time studying and debating how emissive these surfaces are going to be as this emerging playa or drying lake bed comes out from underneath the surface of the water. There's some uncertainty about how much dust is going to come off of that. However, I think we can all agree that any type of sand covered surface is going to be dustier than a sheet of water. And so as we have these lake levels drop, whatever is emerging is going to be dustier than what was there before. And so as we have more exposed lake bed, it stands to reason that you're going to have more emissions. And so this is a region that's already very, very dusty. And as this water level is dropping, it's essentially a certainty that we're going to see those dust levels increase even further. And of course, just I don't think it should be a surprise to hear that it's best to keep all particles out of your lungs, right? We prefer to not have any particles in the lungs. As a quick primer, we classify particles mostly by size. So particulate matter, or which we call PM, The larger category of PM10 is mostly associated with things like dust and pollens and molds. We have an even smaller type that we sometimes refer to as PM2.5, which more commonly forms from the condensation of gases. So chemistry and physics of gases condensing into form very, very tiny particles. PM10 is usually the one that we associate with emissions from surfaces like the emerging playa. And none of those are great to have in our bodies. They each, depending on the size, can penetrate to different depths into our throats and our lungs. But of course, it's best not to have anything anywhere inside there. And they're all associated with different kinds of health outcomes, negative health outcomes, when we get these kinds of particulates in our body. And beyond that, it's also worth noting that not all particles are created equal. One grain of sand may not be identical to a grain of sand that is produced from a different region. And so the local source type is going to be very important, potentially very important, for determining what kinds of health effects that dust has if it gets into the human body. And so this is from a study that was led by my colleague at UCR, Emma Aronson and Mia Maltz. And they have been looking at dust and sediment from different areas, including samples from Palm Springs up here at this northernmost star, and then down here close to the Salton Sea shoreline. And they're looking at how these different types of sediments can have very different types of composition. Different sources of these sediments will vary not just by elemental composition, so the amount of silica, carbon, but also organic compounds. And this is potentially, by the way, a lot of this work is still ongoing and we don't have all the answers yet. But one thing that we're looking at and very interested in is how the difference in organic compounds, the microorganisms that are around the Salton Sea, might play a role in some of the health impacts that we see there. So the causes and the consequences, the green here, by the way, is showing the organic fraction. And you can see that close to the Salton Sea, we have a much larger piece of the pie that's made up of those organics than say at the silica-based, more silica-based compounds that we see up by, say, the Palm Springs area. So the question that we're trying to answer here, the question that I've been working on for the past couple of years, is could increasing levels of dust from this shrinking Salton Sea exacerbate the health impacts on an already vulnerable population? And this is what we're trying to examine and trying to bring these results to the attention of folks who might be able to make a difference in terms of reducing these impacts. What we do know is that at the county level, childhood asthma levels near that Salton Sea are nearly triple the incidence rates for the rest of California. And this is high even compared to other similarly dusty regions. So this is what kind of caught our eye as we were looking at areas that we wanted to focus on. Asthma is really high. And we wanted to look at childhood asthma and look at these possible connections to issues like the Salton Sea shrinking. Other areas, say in the Imperial Valley, other surveys have suggested an even higher incidence down there, where you actually get even more of the windblown dust down in the Imperial Valley compared to the Coachella. And further north, for example, in the Palm Springs area, we don't see such high elevated levels. There's obviously many different possible drivers for asthma. It's a very complicated type of health outcome. One of the things that we want to investigate, though, is could that Salton Sea dust exposure play a role? Could that be a piece of these health outcomes that we're seeing? And if so, what can we expect in the future? And how can we mitigate? How can we reduce those problems that may be caused by that exposure? To this end, one of my mentors and colleagues, Dr. David Lowe at UCR, led a group that tried to get some NIH funding and was successful in establishing a 5-year grant that we've got at UCR studying this exact same thing. So we've been working on this for 2 years now, and we're starting to get some preliminary output, and we're crossing the halfway mark and hitting our stride, I think, in building momentum towards answering some of these questions. This was a Center for Health Disparities Research at UC Riverside, and I've got a link for that at the end. But this is where a lot of the work that I'm going to be showing you here comes from. So some of the work that I do is looking at these concentrations that are measured and wind patterns to look at where this dust is going and where it's coming from. And so we have a number of observations that can be used to look at concentrations of particulate matter in the valley, including stations in the in the Coachella Valley, and also on the south end in the Imperial Valley. And one of the first things I did when I started working on this problem was to just build a map of what kinds of concentrations we see when. This is kind of a complicated plot here, but we've got the stations going from north to south, going down here. So we've got Palm Springs, Indio, Mecca, Torres Martinez. And over here, we've got the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And the size of these bars, the heights, is basically showing how much dust is happening at one time of day. So later in the day, so noon is right about in the middle, what we can see is that there's very high levels of dust, typical at the sites that are closest to the Salton Sea. So the Mecca site, the Torres Martinez, the Nyland, the Westmoreland, these are sites that are closest to the sea. And these are areas where, especially in the spring and in the summer, we see very high PM10 levels, very high dust levels, especially in the afternoon and early evening. So this was kind of, for me, getting a sense of what's the cycles that we see? What are the patterns of dust that we see? When and where are we seeing these events? We can then break that down by direction. The next question we want to ask is, where's this dust coming from? So breaking this down by observed daytime wind direction, this is the Indio station right here. And you can see that in those spring and summer months, the red here is showing southerly wind directions, wind coming from the south. And you can see that as we move into the summer, the wind directions, which tend to be a little bit more balanced between north, south, and west, that's the blue, red, and green respectively, we get more and more of these daytime wind directions coming from the south during those seasons when we have those elevated dust concentrations that we saw for those southern eastern Coachella Valley stations. So this again was indicating to me, this is a time of year and this is a time of day when we might be interested in transport from that Salton Sea region. These figures right here are taken from the Torres Martinez station right over here. And the colors here are showing you dust concentrations based on wind speed and direction. So in the spring, we can see the red coming from the northwest, which indicates that a lot of those dust events for this station are coming from the northwest wind directions when we have those high events. Notice though that in the summertime, there's an increased number of these events for wind coming from the southeast. And that's the direction where we would expect, if there were emissions coming from the Salton Sea, that's where they would be arriving. That's when and where. And so again, we're getting this suggestion that these winds, these high wind events that are coming from those directions, when they happen, even though they're not particularly common, when they do, we would expect to have more dust coming from that Salton Sea exposed playa. One of my students, Yaning Miao, is also working on looking at health outcomes themselves. So she has taken survey data of looking at reports of asthma that were taken from telephone surveys over the last 10 years. They've been running these every 3 years, as well as looking at hospital admission data to see if we can find patterns in when and where people are reporting respiratory illnesses. This is ongoing work, and we're hoping to get this released this year. But I think this is hopefully going to give us some more indications about what kinds of wind events and what kinds of dust sources are going to be most impactful on residents in the area. She's got some good, interesting outcomes looking at both survey data, looking at where people are identifying and where people are reporting these types of symptoms, as well as the frequency of hospital visits related to respiratory disease. One of the questions that's very important and is on all the residents' minds whenever we talk to community members, and by the way, and I want to point out that this particular project is very closely tied to the community. We meet monthly with community groups from the Coachella Valley area, and we have members on our board, our community advisory board, who inform us and report back the findings that we get as we receive them. And one of the things that we often hear is that people want to know what's in this dust. And so one of the most pressing questions that we're working on right now is trying to collect dust from as many sources as we can to do this study of composition, both in terms of elemental analysis and microorganism characterization. You can see them right here. They look like little bird feeders maybe. These are actually pans full of marbles that are placed. They're basically passive samplers that are placed all around the sea. And when they're out there for an extended period of time, all the dust that's blowing around some of it will get trapped on all of that exposed surface area. And we can then collect those pans. And this is done mostly by, again, Emma Aronson's group, who's interested in the microbiology. We can collect those pans and run studies on those collected dust particles to look at how the composition varies over space and time. We've also got this new collection method of looking at what's coming directly off of the sea. So this is a surface water skimmer that's able to collect gases and particles that might be coming, emerging from the sea and being associated directly with the water itself. So we're trying to get a full characterization of everything that's occurring on the land and over the water. One of the things we do with those collected particles, of course, we analyze the composition. We also look at the health impacts. This is a mouse chamber where we are able to expose collections of mice to different types of dust. And we can then see what those impacts are for different types of dust themselves. And this has some pretty striking results. We can see, for example, that when we compare Salton Sea dust to the dust, say, collected from the Palm Desert, there's different types of inflammation that can be found in lung tissue as a result of inhaling these different types of dust. These particular arrows right here, these arrows are pointing to the abundance of neutrophils, which are associated with health conditions that are sometimes associated with bacterial pneumonia. Extracts from the Palm Desert dust do not have these same types of inflammation responses. However, one thing that's notable and one thing that we're still trying to puzzle out is that this type of inflammation, although unique to the Salton Sea dust, does not fit the patterns associated with traditional asthma. And so this raises the question, if we're giving children inhalers, so typical type of asthma treatments, if this is being caused by something unique to the Salton Sea dust that is not the same as asthma symptoms, that is not associated with traditional asthma, are we treating the right disease? Are we treating the right conditions if we're treating it as asthma and that inflammation is not following those same types of behaviors? This is something that we're investigating right now in the hopes of developing treatments that will be more effective for the residents of the area. And I'll just wrap up in summary. I know that was a quick tour down many different types of research. The questions that we're hoping to look at going forward, we're looking at these additional dust collections. We're ramping up more of these collection sites, more types of dust collection. We're collaborating with local community groups to see where they're interested in trying to figure out what is in this dust. We're doing comprehensive particle characterization, including looking at the organics and the microbiomes, the microorganisms that live on different types of surfaces, including the sediments and the airborne dust itself. Ongoing dust monitoring and mitigation efforts are underway. As some may know, Assembly Bill 617 has selected the Eastern Coachella Valley as a region where they're trying to look at health disparities and air pollution. And so efforts are underway right now to work on keeping that dust from flying around. And then groups like mine are looking at modeling and forecasting tools that will alert citizens when there's going to be an expected dust episode and where that dust would be expected to come from. This is a project that I've been working on this year that I hope to have some progress on soon. More information on the efforts at UCR, I'll just plug a couple things. The Breathe Center, which is a group at UCR looking at different types of aerosolized toxins in many different locations, not just the Eastern Coachella Valley and the Salton Sea, but that community as well. And then I mentioned the NIH Center funding, which is the Center for Health Disparities Research. And both of those links can get you more information on the kind of work that we're doing at UCR. And that'll wrap it up for my slides. I'll be happy to take any questions that come my way too. Thank you all for your time and your attention.
Great, thank you, Will. That was outstanding and brought up some new issues, new information for me. And I've been kind of following this for the last 4 or 5 years. So thank you. So John is going to manage our Q&A. And so he'll read the questions and direct them to Will or myself or Marianne.
The first question I got was from Emily Kessler. Is anyone talking about ways to get water back into the Salton Sea?
Why don't I take that? The answer is yes. The way we are addressing it, we the Sierra Club, is trying to keep the state focused on the 10-year plan and getting the work done that it is committed to do and has the funding for. The state also has committed to that long-term plan, which may or may not include bringing water into the sea. And that is due by the end of 2022. So that's where we are on it. But there have been multiple proposals on bringing water either from the Pacific Ocean or from the Gulf of California. The latest summary of those organizations making proposals on bringing water into the sea, it appears clear that it will be not from the Pacific Ocean, so it would be the Gulf of California, and it would be a channel and not a pipe because of the costs associated with it. But it's a very expensive project and involves lots of different factors. So that's kind of where it stands. We're waiting for the state to do um, to complete the long-term planning process, which you're committed to do.
Okay. The next two questions are sort of, they're related to each other. Robin Sands asked, wasn't the dust there before the sea existed? And Kelly Wing, is the dust more hazardous due to agricultural chemical runoff? And I know Mary Ann was kind of in the chat talking about that, so I'll let her.
Well, yes, I just answered in the chat that, the larger sea came and went over history. And then when the current sea was created in 1906, it covered a bigger area than is covered now. And as the sea shrinks, the dusty playa under the sea is exposed. And the dust includes agricultural chemical runoff. There's people living there now. So even if the dust was there before the sea was created, there wasn't the large population of folks working there, and many live in substandard conditions and then are growing the food that we need and eat every day. So I would also like to have Will chime in on is the dust more hazardous due to agricultural chemicals?
Yeah, that's certainly been one theory that has been proposed and explored, and we're also exploring that as well. I think it's worth noting that dust is everywhere, right? And especially in a desert region, there's no escaping the dust. What we do on the land is going to affect the composition and the risks associated with those particles, though. You're going to get different types of impacts from dust, say, that is radioactive because you've been, it's at a nuclear site and has been exposed. You're going to get different impacts on that otherwise ordinary dust than you would if you had just out in the middle of nowhere where nothing has disturbed. And of course, I also saw the mention of agricultural emissions themselves coming off of fields. And that's definitely something that we're exploring as well. The Imperial Valley is very important agriculturally, and there's all kinds of emissions of both gas and particle phase compounds coming off of that activity as well. So there's many different types of influences of these types of particles and for air quality in the entire region.
Thank you, Will.
From Julian Anderson, if the evidence regarding dust eventually is focused enough to prove causation, who would be the defendant in the lawsuit? The state of California? Question mark.
I'm going to leave that one for, I don't know. Will, do you want to take that one on?
I'm not a lawyer, so I have no idea as far as litigation goes. I will say that our efforts are focused on treatment and mitigation. We are focused on looking at solutions that will benefit the people living in the area. So as far as the legal obligations and the legal ramifications, I don't even want to speculate because I'd probably be wrong.
Yeah, me too.
Well, let me comment that the state has the obligation to fix the problem. And whether there is and a significant part of what has happened in terms of delays has related to the issues of liability. And there are liabilities associated with the dust associated with the Salton Sea drying up. So it's we those of us here, as Will said, we're not attorneys. We don't really know the answer, but it's a concern.
Kathy Wing's question, I think, if I'm wrong, she can chime in again, but I think her question was kind of answered in the previous answer. Next, I have Lorraine Turk. If what I've been reading about the possibilities of increased lithium mining in and around the sea, is that likely to have positive or negative effects on the dust issue, or none? I could chime in partially on that, or
go ahead. Go ahead, John.
I don't know if anybody said, there was a really, really inclusive article in last Saturday's newspaper that got into this issue quite in depth. And I guess the simple answer is I don't think they know yet. If it's going to, I mean, obviously the lithium is a positive thing for making batteries and for other environmental issues, but there's a question whether the lithium, whether it's going to do anything to improve the state of the sea or the people that live around it. I know the article made notice of a lot of people, you know, thousands of people getting hired in this, but it didn't say that the people that were going to get hired are people like we saw in the video from Elliott or from those people that live around it. So I think that, at least from what I gathered out of that, the jury is still out on exactly, can it do help or do further damage? But maybe, I don't know if Kim or Marianne have any other.
Let's have Will take
Will,
a shot at it.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I'm going to have to pass as well. I have heard some, and I have colleagues who are working on, but I don't information on the methodology and the impacts, environmentally speaking, of those types of operations. I would assume that at this point, any operation that was put into place, they would do a study looking exactly at what types of impacts that would have on dust exposure and mobilization. But to my knowledge, that hasn't been done yet. I don't think it's far enough along to get that information.
Yeah, and I think we have, there is a committee or commission studying that whole proposal. I don't know if that's been appointed yet. Kim, do you know if that committee has been appointed?
I don't think they've completed the appointment, but it was recommended by Eduardo Garcia to the governor to put together a commission to look at the mining opportunities around the Salton Sea and to consider these issues of equability for the residents, as well as how the state might incentivize that activity down there.
I think we got one last question. Are part of the studies on how far and what direction the dust is blowing? How many miles away does the dust blow? I'll give a personal statement on that. When I've only lived out here in the desert for about 3.5 years, and the end of the first summer I lived here, I'm a runner. I went out for a run one morning, and the air was absolutely, it was almost, yeah, it smelled like there was rotten eggs all over. I mean, it just was awful. I thought our apartment sewer was acting up or something. I went back in the house, turned on the Channel 3 local news, and the weatherman said, "Oh, if you smell what, you know, it's blowing from the south, and that's the Salton Sea you smell out there." And he was up in Palm Springs. So William can probably address how much further than that it goes, but it certainly reaches Palm Desert and Palm Springs.
No, that's exactly right. The simple answer is it can reach you. Yeah. Dust, depending on the wind conditions, can go halfway across the planet. And we've seen cases where very strong dust storms in the Sahara can cross the ocean, and reach continents away. Now, those types of events are not common. And by and large, dust will tend, especially the larger particles, will tend to fall, 5-10 miles. It's rare to have events where it would be lofted that high enough for it to stay in the atmosphere that long. But especially for the smaller specks of stuff, it can stay airborne for quite a while, surprisingly long amount of time. And all you have to do is multiply the wind speed by the hours that it stays aloft. And it can go pretty darn far, especially if it manages to get up. Now, the good news for residents who are further away is that it becomes less and less concentrated the longer it travels and disperses. However, if there is health outcomes that we find associated with these particular particles during very strong wind events, it could be transported across the state.
And John, there was one follow-up question that I'll just read it off here. It was before this one, and it was from Julianne following up on the question of culpability or liability. She's thinking about, that there was a dust mitigation settlement in the Owens Valley between the city of LA DWP and residents of the Owens Valley area. But I don't know that there's anything similar in Salton Sea area because there's not a single water district. But could you answer that question, or anybody have a thought on that? I know the state has a plan to mitigate it and they're not moving quickly enough. So I think that's the issue. I don't know if you can be able to consider them liable, but they're not moving quickly enough with the money they have and the plans to actually make a difference.
It's like there's one last question, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure. What is the effect of the windmills in the valley? That's from Janelle Bolts. And I guess I'd have to ask her in what way does she want to know if they affect? If she wants to unmute herself.
Yeah, Janelle, if you want to unmute. Not sure where you are here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, it worked. Yeah, there's a lot of windmills in the valley, and do they blow the dust in one direction or the other? Does that have any effect?
No, for the most part, windmills wouldn't be expected to increase dust. If anything, windmills would slightly slow down wind speeds near the surface, and so you'd expect to get a little bit less dust. However, I don't think that would be a measurable outcome. I think that for the most part, windmills are not going to have a strong enough impact in either way to increase or decrease.
Yeah. They don't really
dust emissions.
blow the wind, take the wind.
Right.
What about the off-road activity out there?
Off-road activity, on the other hand, has big impacts. Yeah, and in fact, there's some dust events where we'll see on the measurements, and there won't be any particular dust storm happening, and there'll be there's lots of head scratching, and then people will discover that there was a big off-road group that was going through. Those are definitely areas where human activity can really impact what kinds of emissions we see. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that wraps up our questions, Q&A, and Marianne, will toss it back to you. Thank you, Will. That was outstanding presentation. Really appreciated it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, excellent.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you, Will and Kim and John. Very, very helpful. So I've dropped in the chat, I've dropped a link to, it's just everybody gets tired of surveys, but this is more of an interest document, just a couple of questions about what you're interested in, what things you might be interested in doing to help, such as, writing letters, making public comment at online meetings, writing an op-ed, those sorts of things that are helpful as we try to influence policymakers. So I will also email this link out to folks after this meeting. I'm going to send an email to everyone that registered. So you'll get it there. You'll also get a link to the little video that we watched part of. I want to just again plug that on the 17th, we have another event. Actually, I'm going to let Julianne, are you still on the call, Julianne? You want to say just a short amount about the trail talk on the 17th?
Sure, Marianne, thank you.
Thanks.
We're having a birding trail talk with our own Brian Elliott. In fact, we just met today to do our prep session. But Brian, as many of you I'm sure know, is the outings leader over at the Los Serranos group and a very experienced birder. So he'll be presenting all different aspects of birding in the San Gorgonio chapter and at all levels, from beginner to advanced. So if you're interested in birding or you're new to it like I am, from really due to the pandemic, or if you're an experienced birder, I think there'll be something for everyone. He'll be talking about various areas in the San Gorgonio chapter: high desert, low desert, western end of the chapter, and down into Murrieta, etc. And techniques, apps, books, equipment, and how to effectively see birds. So I think it's going to be a very interesting presentation.
And he will be talking some of his birds will be birds that you would see at the Salton Sea that are affected by the lack of water and the high salinity that's killing the birds. Killing the fish. So the birds don't have food. So you'll be seeing some of the amazing birds and flocks of birds that come there about the Salton Sea. So thank you. And the survey I've put in here also just gives you a chance in general to comment if you would like more information about our chapter. Date of the birding presentation is March 17th at the same time. It's on our website. I will put a link in. I will send everyone the registration link, which would be similar to what you did to get on this call, but I'm also going to drop it in the chat right now. So, but I'll email it in case you're not able to just pick it up from the chat. So I want to.
Oh man, I have 100 here.
And go ahead and take yourselves off mute if anybody else wants to say anything or.
Thank you.
I'm gonna head out. It was nice to meet everybody. I hope to meet you in person someday once this is all all this is wrapped up. Bye-bye.
I will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Ellen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for everyone that attended. This is, we really appreciate your interest and look forward to linking up with you again, either out there birding or working on the Salton Sea or some other issues. Fabulous. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Marianne. Great presentation.
Yeah, these guys did a really good job. Yeah. They're taking this presentation on the road too and showing it to a number of different organizations. So if you know anyone that, or any place that might want a presentation, you know, they've got it ready to go.
Right on. Well, listen, good night. Well done.
Yeah. All right. Well, good night, everyone. I'm going to close the meeting now. Thank you.